I wanted to talk about what we call the seven C's of basic legislative drafting. During the time of the pandemic, I spent some time researching and reading about legislative drafting and reviewing some of the materials that are out there. Athabasca University in Alberta, Canada, actually has a graduate diploma in legislative drafting, and they teach their graduate law students about these seven C's as guidelines for successful bill drafting. The first is capable of being complied with. The second is clear. The third is comprehensible. The fourth is concise. The fifth is complete. The sixth is consistent. And the seventh is certain. So these seven C's, of course, the letter C, come from addressing the seven standards that users of statutes expect when they read the law. So the first is tell them what they want to know, meaning it's capable of being complied with. Second, the statute's easy to read and understand, the second C, or clear. The third is that the law is not obscure, so it's comprehensible. The fourth is to use the shortest space, being concise. The fifth is dealing with all the necessary points of the law, meaning it's complete. The sixth is that it doesn't contain any contradictions, meaning it's consistent. And the seventh is that it doesn't leave any doubt, that is, it's certain. So now that you've heard the seven C's and why they establish goals for legislative drafters, how are these seven standards of basic legislative drafting actually practiced? Well, a legislative drafter is taught to engage in these seven practices to achieve the goals of the seven C's. The first is to analyze and plan, which means that the drafter has a solid idea of what he or she needs to communicate when beginning to draft the legislative measure. This requires having knowledge about the background of the bill proposal, its policy rationale, as well as a firm understanding of existing law. The bill drafter has explored different options for addressing the public policy goal and objectives of the legislator and has done a basic outline of the structure of the measure's provisions that need to be drafted. The second is to provide a rational structure to the statutory text. This means that the contents of the legislative measure are well organized and that the statute flows in a logical and understandable way. This requires that the key aspects of the measure are to be readily identifiable and easily understood by the reader of the statute. The third is to follow legislative drafting standards, which means that the bill drafter needs to follow the legal requirements and the drafting principles and standards in his or her jurisdiction. The fourth is to always use an effective writing style, which means that the bill drafter should focus on the seven C's we discussed and work to make sure that the legislative measure is easy to read and understand. The drafter then needs to write in standard English and follow the rules of proper grammar, as well as use simple and concise legislative sentences throughout the statute. Fifth, choose a good presentation, which means that the legislative text that you're drafting needs to be easy to digest, and the drafter should include short sentences, appropriate paragraphs or subsections, in an effort to ensure that the reader is able to easily read and understand the legislative text. Sixth is to provide aids to finding and using the text, which means that the bill drafter makes it easy for the reader to find their way around the legislative text and the statutory scheme. This includes appropriate headings for sections, as well as organizing provisions in a logical and appropriate manner. Seventh, finally, check and scrutinize, which means that the legislative drafter will review each version of their draft text, looking at the text as though he or she is a first-time reader and making appropriate improvements, addressing any needed changes, such as eliminating unnecessary or duplicative details, using shorter sentences, and removing any superfluous words. These approaches, again, are recommended by the graduate program at Athabasca University in Canada. They're done so to help develop skilled legislative drafters and enable attorneys to craft legislative measures that achieve those 7 C's we discussed earlier, so that the laws that are drafted are understandable and can be readily complied with by those who are regulated by those laws, as well as be interpreted in the manner in which the legislative sponsor intends them to be interpreted.